The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Why Your Company Should Have a Risk Management Program. My name is Michelle and I'll be helping with today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate. This webinar is being recorded. We will provide you a link to the recording as soon as it is available. You have joined today's webinar listening through your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to use your telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. Attendees will be in listen-only mode, but we invite you to ask questions about the presentation using the questions panel. Just type in your question and click Send. At the end of the webinar, we will do a Q&A session and take as many questions as possible. Now let me introduce you to our presenter today. David Willson is the owner and president of Titan Info Security Group and a retired Army JAG. While in the Army, he advised the DoD and NSA on computer network ops law, and he was the legal advisor to what is now Cybercom. A published author and active speaker, David is a licensed attorney in Colorado, New York, and Connecticut. He is the VP of his local ISSA chapter and a member of InfoGuard. Thanks so much, David. Welcome, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Does the screen look good?
Everything looks great.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Hope everybody's doing pretty good. We got about an hour, and I hope to get a lot of questions so we can get a good discussion going. If a question comes up and it comes through to me and I can answer it right away, I will do so. But for the most part, I'm going to try and wait till the end because I tend to get sidetracked and launch off into different topics and babble on and on and on. So this webinar is called Why Your Company Should Have a Risk Management Program. It's focused on cybersecurity, protecting information, the responsibility of the leadership of companies. So this is great knowledge if you own a company, if you're an executive, or if you have influence over those people. Certainly if you're the CIO, CISO, IT, someone in that category, you need to go to the leadership and say, hey, this is something you need to be paying attention to because of everything that's going on in the news. If you don't have a plan, you're going to get stuck. So let's get into this real quick. And at the end, I'll explain all the different emails and companies that you see. I'm actually part of 3 different companies at this time. So, okay, I wanted to start out with a survey. And I'm actually in an entrepreneur class right now for veterans, and they forced us to create a survey and actually go out and talk to people, which was outside of my comfort zone. I love networking and doing stuff like that, but having to go out and do what I consider cold calling or cold visits was not my idea of fun. Anyway, these were the questions, sort of rhetorical, but in the chat section, if you want to put answers, that'd be great. That'll help me out with where people are. And I'll show you later that 90% of the people that I've spoken to answered pretty much the same way. And that'll just give me more information. And then I write articles and blogs for Global Knowledge, and I put that stuff out on there so you can read about it later as well. And while I'm on that, there is a risk assessment action sheet that I put together that I believe Global Knowledge is going to publish on their website, and so you can look for that there. If you don't see it, email me and I will get you one. So first question, do you believe you will suffer, you meaning your company, will suffer a breach or be hacked in the next year? Are you concerned about it? Are you satisfied with your efforts to prevent a breach or hack? Do you have a plan if you do get breached or hacked? And do you know what you would do if you found out today that your company had been breached or hacked? And some of these stats I will repeat, but I believe right now it's 92-93% of companies that are breached find out through a third party. They don't, it's not some bells. And I apologize if I'm preaching to the choir and I'm talking too low level for a lot of you. I have to keep this at a low level because you don't know who's listening. So I'll try and I was trying to throw in some higher level stuff. I don't consider myself a techie guy, but I do have a good level of knowledge when it comes to that. But anyway, time will tell. So here's the agenda. We're going to go through some of the recent breaches, problems, common security implementations, and cost of breach. This is not the webinar is not the state of security. That's not the main focus. It's what should you be doing based on these threats and these risks to your organization. So I've had people say in the past, oh, well, I thought I was going to learn about all the recent breaches and how they happen and who's doing what. And but in that regard, if you want to know what's going on, I recommend Krebs on Security, KREBS on security.com. Brian Krebs does a great job putting out information on recent breaches, what's going on, who's doing what, and because of that, he gets attacked all the time. Some hackers did a swatting on him where they got his cell phone number, sent the police to his house, claiming that he was being held hostage by Russian terrorists. They sent, I believe, heroin to his house. They mailed it. So they're always trying to get him because he outs them constantly. Okay, state of security. These are some of the surveys that I've actually pulled up. If you look at this one, obviously the bar on security has been raised, but it seems that if you follow the news and security blogs and things like that, as soon as companies start picking up and putting more money to security, trying new tools, new techniques, things like that, the hackers are just so far ahead of what's going on, and they're very well funded. For those who don't know, or if you're very old school, hackers are no longer the teenage kid in the basement. It's now big business. It's all about money and profit. So organized crime is involved, nation states, just criminal gangs, people looking to profit, and they want to steal anything and everything. And unfortunately, I still run into a lot of people, and definitely in that survey I did, who will say to me, oh, I don't have anything the hackers would want to steal. And I love to tell this story because as an attorney, I love to bash my own profession. I was at a mixer with a bar association, and somebody introduced me to an attorney that was walking by, this older gentleman. And they said, oh, Dave Willson here, he does cybersecurity. And the guy who was walking by looked at me and said, oh, well, I do probate law, and my clients don't have that much money, so we don't have anything the hackers would want to steal. And I was just kind of like left there with my mouth hanging open, but I was able to get out as he continued walking by rudely that he's the first person I would go after because he probably doesn't even use a password. So unfortunately, that attitude is still out there, and in my opinion, there's a lot of good software and hardware and really good vendors, but it all comes down to the people. It's the gray matter between the ears and our actions. And really when it comes down to it, it's convenience versus security, and security lost a long time ago. Uh-oh. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the problem. I sort of described the problem a little bit. This was an article I recently read, and I have the author in the next slide. It's not a common name, but Cybersecurity Risk Perception versus Reality in Corporate America. An excellent article, and it basically talks about why company executives are sort of in this mindset that their company is secure. That's why I put that survey together. I had actually read this article previously, and I was kind of baffled by the attitude in this article. Like it says, 73% of North American executives are confident their company's security is good. and I mentioned the 90% on the survey, and because of that, when I did my survey, 90% of the respondents believed that they would not be breached in the next year, which floored me. But a majority of survey respondents believe their orgs will perform better or the same compared to the last 12 months. Most C-levels feel optimistic about readiness. 72% of survey respondents feel safe from IT threats. And, you know, as I go through this, I'm thinking, how did they get such a lower level of response compared to me? Mine was 90% all the way through. And maybe it was because possibly theirs was written versus mine was face-to-face, you know, sort of on the spot. And so it was just odd. And so the author of this survey is trying to determine, based on what she found out, why people felt this way. And then in the article, she goes into optimism bias, which leads to false confidence in security, and business leaders simply don't understand cybersecurity risk. And let me grab the author's name right here because I want to give her credit for this. Her name is Sonali Shah. It's S-O-N-A-L-I-S-H-A-H. And she did a great, well, I say she. It could be he. I could be butchering his or her name. I apologize. But great article. I recommend it. And so I'm going to go into real quickly these two concepts as we move through. So recent breaches, and I'll get to those concepts in a minute. I just want to cover these breaches. Everybody obviously is, unless you've been living under a rock, is familiar with Target and the breaches there. Sally Beauty, Michaels, and I have some stats here based on those. Like Michaels, 2.6 million credit and debit cards were lost or stolen in that breach. And if you're not familiar, Michaels, this is, I believe, their third breach in the last 3 to 5 years. But the most recent attack, they said, occurred between May 2013 and January 2014. If you go to White Lodging, they are actually the owners of Hilton, Marriott, Sheraton, and Westin hotels. And they suffered a breach, obviously Nieman Marcus, more than 350,000 credit and debit cards compromised. According to the article, hackers bounced through their networks undetected for 8 months, setting off 60,000 plus security alarms that went unnoticed. Sally Beauty Supply, 25,000 records compromised. And then Target. It depends on the stats that you're looking at. 40 million credit debit cards affected, 110 million people affected. And one of the interesting things about that one was that Beth Jacob, who was the CIO, resigned over that. And I heard somebody say the other day, pointed out that her major in college was actually retail merchandising. So some of the speculation is that she was not really qualified. I can't say one way or the other, but that's what some of the articles allude to, and what I heard somebody speak on was whether or not she had the background necessary for this. My point with these is that I don't care who you are or who you think you are or how good you think you are, you're going to get breached. If hackers want in, they will get in. If they have the money and the resolve, they will get in. There's nobody that can say I'm 100% breach proof unless you disconnect completely. Then you have physical security to worry about. So it's going to happen. And then when you add on top of that employees who want their convenience, don't understand security, don't understand what hackers are looking for, like the attorney I mentioned, who he was somewhat arrogant anyway, but it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it except protect yourself from the end game, and that's the focus of this. If you have a good plan and a good program in place, you can step back and say, okay, that's the best I could do. I'm happy with it. I have peace of mind, like saying, okay, well, I know I'm going to die one day. Everybody's going to die. You can't cheat death. So I will go get some life insurance. You have the life insurance, you eat right, you exercise, do other things you should do to try and prolong your life, and then you just say, okay, hey, that's the best I could do. I'm going to just be happy and move on with my life. That's the same concept that I'm talking about here, except, and you would think, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's common sense. But I'll tell you, 90% or more of the companies are not doing that, or not even coming close to doing that. So, okay, so, and here we'll get into it. Some of the common security implementations. Yes, I've got a firewall. Yes, I've got antivirus. How good is it? I don't know. If you're a small business, if you have one, as far as I'm concerned, then you've met that reasonableness standard. You got firewall, passwords, IDS, IPS, whatever you're using. You hired somebody to help you, on and on. And if we have time, I'll get into that. You hired somebody else piece of it, and the third-party vendor. A lot of the responses to my survey to what have you done to secure your company is, oh, well, we hired XYZ IT company. Well, A, and this is not to bash IT people, A, is that IT company, do they know cybersecurity? Do they have cybersecurity experts? Or, like many IT companies and IT departments, was the cybersecurity thrown in their lap and suddenly they found themselves forced into having to secure everything as well as set up the network, keep it running, make sure there's no glitches, the bandwidth is there, so on and so forth. Everybody's email works, on and on. So you have to make sure you have somebody that knows what they're doing. Or have your IT company, have them take care of all that, and get a cybersecurity person or cybersecurity company that comes in and does your pen test, your vulnerability assessment, looks at the risks, things like that. So, standard configuration, you can see where I pulled these images from. Intrusion detection system, like I said, the firewall, hide the internal IP addresses behind all that, on and on and on. So you have your configurations, and there's always good advice on, oh, well, if you configure like this, if you implement that, if you do this, if you do that, on and on and on. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it can get overwhelming. So, which goes back to the whole cybersecurity thing. Just like understanding IT and all the new configurations, all the new devices, all mobile devices, cloud, on and on and on, and being able to set that up and make sure everybody has access to what they need access to, when they need it, where they need it, on what device. Same thing with cybersecurity. You have to stay on top of it. You can't say, I checked that block, we're good. You know, I put a lock in, I turn the key, we're good. That's not how it works. There's so much new malware every single day. Let's see, McAfee, and these are 2 or 3 year old statistics, but McAfee, 60,000 new malware samples a day. I can't remember the other company, but one of the other big companies has reported 180,000 new malware samples a day. So it's overwhelming. You've got to find the people who can do the job and are staying on top of it. It's not a set and forget concept. So, okay, I think I beat that horse to death. So, common security implementations. This is a great quote. I don't know if I'd use the word foolproof, but the government gets breached constantly. Nations get breached constantly. You would think governments hiding the most valuable secrets, and I won't even get into the whole Snowden thing, but you would think that they would have the best security around, and they do, and they still get breached. So it's not like, oh, well, so-and-so over here or this vendor over there, they have the solution. And if there are any vendors out there, or IT companies, or even cybersecurity companies, I caution you, don't even hint that you are securing anybody, because you're not. You can lower the risk and try and help prevent a breach, but you're not securing anybody. And as soon as you give that indication and the company is breached, you're going to get sued. And I'll get into the whole Target thing in a minute, but there was a jewelry company in, I believe, Chicago, had an IT company set up a VPN so they could access their networks remotely. The VPN wasn't working, and this was actually negligent, but the IT company told the executives, well, just go around the VPN, you'll be okay. They got breached. They turned around and sued the IT company. So you cannot even hint that you are securing somebody, because it's not possible unless you're Superman, and I haven't met him yet. Okay, so along that line, before I get to that, and I don't want to skip this, if you go online and you Google Target and banks and Trustwave was the company, and I can't verify this now because there's a lot of wrangling going on, but Trustwave was the company that supposedly did a security check, maybe a pen test, vulnerability assessment, I'm not sure, in like September for Target, and announced that they were secure. Did they announce they were secure? I don't know. That was the rumor. But because of that, Green Bank and Trustmark Bank both sued Target and Trustwave. Supposedly, I don't want to mess it up. One of the two banks has dropped out of the suit, and the articles now claim that Trustwave did not, and Trustwave saying they did not guarantee the security of the point-of-sale machines and that information. So that'll all have to be worked out in court. But as of right now, one of the banks has dropped out, one is still hanging on. Whether that goes through or not, that is a huge lesson. Somebody's being sued because the implication was they secured another company and that company got breached. And the other companies and individuals are now lining up to see, okay, who's got the most money, who am I going to sue? And even if somebody doesn't have a valid suit, just the fact that they file and take you to court is going to cost you a lot of money to have that suit dismissed. So I just wanted to point that out. That's one of the major points here of why you need to have a risk management program. So, okay, so there's no single standard or piece of hardware or software. Is there a combination? Maybe, but that's like, I don't know if you're familiar with that little puzzle, the triangular puzzle with the little pegs you put in, and you pull one out, and then you start jumping around trying to figure out which combination will leave you with just one peg. How many potential combinations are there to get you to one peg? I'm sure there's more than one, and after you finish the puzzle, in most cases, unless you have photographic memory, you don't remember what combination you used. So I equate it to that. And there's my point. No silver bullet of security. Nothing's going to protect you, so you have to do your due diligence. Okay, the cost of the breach, it'll cost you time, money, reputation, revenue. Well, money and revenue are the same, but beyond just the money that you put out, the revenue in loss of business with customers and things like that. So, okay, looking again at this, the cost of the breach. There is obviously an increase in the cost of breaches over time as hackers get better, and they've gotten much better. Everything now is automated. It's not one individual bouncing through networks. It's just point and click, and it's off and running. I was reading something the other day, if I can remember, about how bank sites are compromised online, and I think it was on Krebs on Security that I read it. Anyway, one of the things when I do my class, I do a cybersecurity awareness class. I tell people, if you're going to bank online, which is potentially dangerous, but we all need to do it, unless you have a bank right down the street and it's easy to get to. But close every single window on your computer. Don't have Facebook open and a browser window and whatever other social media you're using and your email and whatever else you have open. I know I've had, as I'm doing research, I've had probably 15, 20 windows open. Close everything. I've spoken to people who believe, and it depends on your level of paranoia, who will actually shut down their system, reboot it, and just open the browser and go to their bank. Because there's malware that you can have on your computer, and you may not even know it because your antivirus may not even catch it, which is not unusual, that will allow the hackers automatically, and it's not somebody sitting there watching you banking online, it will jump from your unsecure browser to your bank browser and compromise it. Or it will pull those credentials as you're making that handshake connection with your bank. And then it will mimic you, and then they have access to your bank account. So, and as far as mobile devices, I tell people just for now, because the level of security I don't believe, and from what I've read and seen, is not there, I tell people just avoid the mobile device for banking. Again, it's convenience versus security. If you're happy where you are and you don't think you'll ever get breached, which is kind of living in a fantasy land, but if you're happy being in that place, then stay there and don't worry about it. If you're concerned, then start using techniques to make yourself more secure. If you want to be really secure, again, I'm going to tout Brian Krebs, and trust me, he doesn't pay me or anything. I've only met the man once, but I really enjoy reading his stuff. He advocates that you set up a virtual operating system on a thumb drive and then use that to do your banking. So you can go to his site and look around and find that. Again, if you missed it, it was Krebs, K-R-E-B-S, on security.com. So send me a check, Brian. Just kidding. Okay, so cost of the data breach, and I have some stats on the new one that's coming out, but the 2013 Verizon data breach incident report, 88% of attacks initiated against financial companies were successful in less than a day. That's pretty fast. And then how long does it take for us to detect breaches? Minimum of days with an S, months, years. Let's see, Target, they believe the breaches were in November, and I think it was, what, January? That's still pretty quick. Michaels, they found out in about January, and they're estimating the attacks were somewhere between May and January. I think it was the McAfee, the Shady Rat report, remote access tool report, that came out in 2011, I believe, and there they indicated that at least 70 companies and nations had hackers in their networks since as far back as 2005 or 6, and they didn't find out until about 2010 or 11. So a long time, and the hackers are getting better and better. Okay, the latest stats, and I didn't go to RSA this year, but supposedly a Mr. Baker was there from Verizon and provided some insight on the 2014 report. And I just want to give you some of these stats here. Baker says in 3/4 of the cases it takes hackers, days or less to compromise their target, while 1/4 of the time victim organizations discover the attack in days or less. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's, at least according to 2013, their own report, it was less than a day, and it takes much longer for victims to discover. Attackers are getting quicker and compromising systems over the past 10 years. Baker said less than 25% of good guys discovered these incidents in days or less. And like he said, not a good situation. Let's see. And like I mentioned, victims do not find out on their own. They find out from someone else. You don't want your client or your customer coming in and saying, hey, I just suffered identity theft and had somebody look into it, and they we're able to trace it back to your company. Let's see. He said the surge in retail breaches is not new to the industry. Obviously, there was TJX a few years back. Let's see, or TJ Maxx. Let's see. So, okay, that was pretty much all the, 2013 found attacks occurring in minutes or less, 84% of the cases, while 66% of breaches go undetected for months or even years. So those were from the new 2014 Verizon report coming out. I wanted to emphasize that for you. Okay, cost of the breach, publicly traded companies, and there's now an additional obligation to disclose. I read something the other day where the FTC was allowed to proceed with a lawsuit claiming a company had not used reasonable security. Well, what's reasonable security? As we've been going through this, who could tell what reasonable security is? So it's really hard to know. There's going to be a lot of wrangling over that. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions yet. Okay. So obviously there was I live in Colorado, there was a local liquor store that was hacked. Their point of sale machine was hacked. This is back in 2009. And this is just to emphasize the loss of revenue, loss of customers. And I'm going to actually go talk to them about it. I think it's been long enough that they'd be willing to share a little information. But they had 1,000 credit card numbers stolen. And it was, the fact that they got breached is probably no big deal because everybody's getting breached all the time. What was a big deal was it was either 2 days in a row or 2 weeks in a row. The fact that they had been breached and what they were doing appeared on the front page of the local newspaper. That's some pretty good advertising for the attackers, not so much for the liquor store. So I started to think to myself, okay, what would I do in order to, because I found out about that. What I would do is I might not visit that liquor store, or I may not go in there with a credit card again. I may just use cash. And, thinking logically, you could say, well, they're probably more secure now, which is true, but go back to Michael's. You would have thought Michael's was more secure after their first breach, certainly after their second, maybe now after the third, I don't know. So, okay, so let's get into some of the meat of this now that we've done some of the background. What can you do? And I'll tell you right now, executives, CEOs, business owners, it is your responsibility. You have a fiduciary responsibility to protect your company. I recently spoke at a CFO conference in New York City, and I don't know if I had just not been paying attention, asleep at the wheel, but I found out that the CFO in a lot of companies is now the manager of the CIO, which makes a lot of sense. I just didn't know that that was happening. And so kudos to those companies that are doing that, because CFO, he's responsible for all the money. It's a risk issue, and he better be on top of what's going on and whether or not there's leaks or holes or what have you. That's not to say that the CFOs that were there that I were talking to had any knowledge, but they definitely are now responsible. And so while I'm on that, I didn't forget about those 2 points in that article, optimism bias, and then in an article I'm writing now, what I would call the emperor has no clothes syndrome. So in this article, optimism bias, it goes into a study by Tali Sharrett, and she is a female. She's either British or Australian, and she is a cognitive neuroscientist. And she does a lecture on TED Talks on optimism bias. And basically, it's very interesting. I recommend you go watch it. But basically, the gist of it is that we all believe we're better looking than the next guy. We certainly all believe we're a better driver than the next guy. We're better at our finances. If you're responsible for IT or security, you probably believe you're better than the next guy at securing a network or setting up a network or what have you, so on and so forth. We all have this optimism about ourselves. And so what she says is that they did the study and then they were able to touch a probe to people's, they didn't go into people's heads, but they just touched the outside, affected a part of their brain center, and what that does is that would actually give them a picture of what's really going on. So let's get to some of that. Here's what a lot of the CEOs are looking. If you can't read that, it says, I should warn you, I might have just clicked on a link that means we should immediately seek alternative employment. We're implementing new security standards in the office, so don't forget to use the secret say okay. And you know, these are funny. And why are things funny? Because they're true. So I won't go into more stories about how bad it is, but if you're in this business, you know. Remember the stat from that article, 73% of executives believe their security is good and nothing will happen. And again, I tell you, my survey was 90% out of, I think I spoke to 25 different companies. And this attitude trickles down to the workforce, and suddenly everybody becomes lackadaisical. This is why I emphasize the training piece, and that it starts at the top and trickles down. So what is the risk assessment? You know what, and I apologize, I thought I had the slide in there. Anyway, let me go back to the optimism bias, and we'll just recover it if I did have it in there and I've forgotten. Maybe it's old age. Anyway, so the optimism bias with the security is these executives all believe that their company, hey, this is my company, it's better than anybody else's company, is more secure than any others. And I had a guy tell me right to my face, oh no, we'll never get breached. I said, well, what about the next guy? He said, well, yeah, they might get breached. Well, why would they get breached and you wouldn't get breached? And as we dug deeper, I could see him start to get more and more nervous. And as I went into these questions, he got more and more nervous. And then he just kind of wanted to walk away and avoid the whole uneasy conversation. And then with the other piece of the article gets into the emperor has no clothes syndrome, as I call it. And I'm almost positive I have a slide, so I apologize. You'll see the slide in a minute. In the article, they say that most CISOs, CIOs, IT departments, they are not telling the executives the state of security, the true state of security. They're not telling them when there's vulnerability. That probability is they will get breached. They're not keeping them informed. I don't know if it's out of fear, because they don't get into why, but they're just not, excuse me, releasing that information to their bosses. And so the bosses are in the dark. That's why I emphasize from the top, the leadership needs to have a risk management program and not say, okay, I'm going to delegate you. Hey, you're not doing anything. Go start a risk management program. Let me know how it's going. We'll check that block. It's got to be the leadership driving it. So risk assessment, what is it? Understand the flow of information across your organization, how it's secured, who's securing it, who has access to it inside and outside of the organization, and what is your goal with protecting that? And we'll get into that a little bit more. I use this picture because let's say you're working in a hospital. There's constant flow of information from computer to computer, person to person, inside the network, outside the network, vendors, all over. So it's a a mess or a hodgepodge of information flowing all over the place. You need to know what that information is, how it's flowing, and how it's secured while it's being verbally spoken. Or I was at a medical appointment the other day, and sitting there in the doctor's office, and they had separate offices, but they had a drop ceiling. I could hear everything discussed in the room next door. And they had a survey, so I put down because they asked me, how did you feel the level of privacy was? Well, there was no privacy because the only thing they couldn't do was see me. They could hear everything that was being discussed, and I could hear everything in that room. Paper-based. People leave papers all over the place. If you have a cleaning crew coming in, don't assume that they're not looking at anything. Assume they're looking at everything. You need a clean desk policy. Lock it all up because they're looking at it, and they're walking away with it. And I hear people say, oh, well, no, we've been using that cleaning crew for years. Okay, but their employees, are those all new employees? Have they had those employees for years? Do you know who those employees are? Have they had a background check? So the display, people putting things up on boards and then digital. One technique I was told about with the proximity logins for medical offices or emergency rooms, you get a staff person to walk by a computer, it automatically logs them in, so you engage somebody in a conversation, have them walk by a system, and your buddy comes up behind, the system's now logged in, and you can quickly get on that system. The policy. Make sure that you have the policies. Once you've taken all that information and you understand the flow of information across your network, what it is, where it is, who has access to it, how it's secured, all that needs to be then captured in the policy because you need to be able to point to the policy. And when I say you, I mean the executive needs to be able to point to the policy and say, here's how we secure information. This is how we handle different instances. If we have mobile devices, here's our BYOD policy. And then you give that to the employees and you say, okay, here's your policy, read it, and either sign the front, the back. I personally tell companies, have them sign every single page. That way, when somebody does a workaround in order to avoid or get around your policy and you need to reprimand them, or you suffer a breach and you're looking for what happened and somebody says, oh, there was negligence here because employee so-and-so did this or did that, you can go to the employee and say, you knew the policy, and when they say, well, I didn't read it, say, well, you signed every page, I don't care, you didn't read it, you're responsible. Then you have some leverage to take the steps you need to in that case. Your policies need to include how we secure in the network, what are we going to do if we're breached, incident response issues, and on and on and on. And there's whole lists of policies. And when I write policies, maybe the longest, 6 pages. Most of them, a page, 2 or 3. Because if you hand an employee a 50-page policy manual, they're definitely not going to read it. If you hand them policies 1 or 2 at a time and they're just 2 or 3 pages, they'll actually go through it and they will actually read it and understand it. And then that's when you get to the training piece. The policy then needs to become part of that cybersecurity awareness training. And you train the employee and the executives, because the executives, as far as I'm concerned, are the worst offenders. Their attitude is, well, I'm the executive, I don't have to worry about it. I'll have my secretary log me in or hold my password, or they'll say to the IT department, no, I can't be bothered with that, it's too inconvenient. Well, it needs to be inconvenient because it's called security. So everybody needs to be trained from the top down. And it's the executives who have the fiduciary responsibility who are going to be held accountable. If you're the owner of a company or an executive in a company and you're breached, you can't turn around to a court and say, well, it's my employee's fault. It's not my fault. I shouldn't be held responsible. Or it's that vendor I hired. It's his fault. And if I'm on the other side of the suit, I'll say, okay, well, I'll just add the vendor to the lawsuit, but you're not going anywhere. So everybody needs to take responsibility. And if you do the training, I recommend doing it live, at least annually. You do the training, you do it right, then the employee will also understand why they're protecting information, like why they need to have a good password at work and at home, because they're also learning to protect their own personal stuff. And then they'll internalize it better, and they'll say, oh, okay, now I understand why I need to do this. It protects this information, and it also protects my own Social Security number or healthcare information or what have you. So you need to make sure that you cover that. Do the training, like I said, annually live training, and then implement a training program where at least once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks, you have a game or some sort of alert, like when the Target breach came out. Put out an email to everybody, hey, Target was breached. They were breached through the company that controls our HVAC system. This is what everybody should be watching for. Or if you use badges, have one employee come in and say, okay, we're going to put John Wayne's picture on your badge, and then put out to the workforce, hey, there's a funny badge walking around. Whoever recognizes it gets a, gift card somewhere. And then everybody's looking at badges. Even if you could care less, you're going to be curious and start looking for that funny badge. So you implement programs like that that keep people thinking and alert and aware. So here's your call to action. I mentioned the risk assessment form earlier. Perform a risk assessment or hire someone to do it. If you've never done that, go do that now. Again, this webinar was why you need a risk assessment program. You need to put something in place and implement it now. Write the policies, or again, hire someone to do that. And along the lines with the policies, if somebody's going to hand you canned policies, that does you no good. Here's what I recommend. When I do a policy, and I have templates. You got to start with templates. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. But I interview the executives, employees, key personnel, and then I write those policies specifically for that company and their situation and customize it to them. Like for instance, in one job I did, the company had been told, oh, best practices, you have to change your password every 90 days. And I won't get off on that tangent why I disagree with that, but this was a manufacturing company. It was very difficult. They had to shut down the whole production in order to change the password every 90 days. So I said, how about you change the password once a year, we make it a really good long password, and we implement red flags. So if you see something funny, then you're going to shut things down and change passwords and so on and so forth. And the president was like, that's great because that'll save us time and money. So you have to customize these to the organization. And then they did have somebody probing, and they had some managed services that was able to catch that, and they were able to change the passwords, and so it worked out well. And then, like I just beat to death, train the workforce, implement a program, or hire someone to do it, and make it live. I remember in the military we had to do security and terrorists and all kinds of training every year, and it was flipping slides, going through a PowerPoint, doing this, and it was like, oh, you're killing me. When we had somebody live come in and get in our face, it was humorous and engaging. That was the best training ever. Okay, let's see if we've got questions. Michelle, you there?
I am. Let's see, we'll do our first question here. If I have hired a company to handle my IT and security and I got breached, shouldn't they be liable and not me?
It depends on what happened. If they secured your company, but one of the employees in your company was negligent, then the brunt of it is going to fall on you. But I can tell you, if I'm the attorney suing, I'm going to add you and the IT company. Everybody's going to get round up and brought into court, and we'll sort it out there. So, and when you go to sue people, you look for the deepest pockets. So that's why you see all these class action suits with all these various data breaches. And I can tell you right now, proving damages is very difficult. For instance, like with Target, people say, oh, I suffered identity theft because of the Target breach. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe your identity theft was from a, let's say, Walmart breach or a Michaels breach or some other retail breach that happened 6 months, a year ago. And if the response is, oh, well, Walmart wasn't breached. Well, Walmart doesn't currently know whether or not they've been breached. They may have been, and they just don't know it, like the stat I talked about earlier that said 92% of companies find out from a third party, and then the Verizon data breach report says it could be months or even years. So.
Okay, just a reminder for everyone, if you do have a question, please type it in the questions panel. We will try and get it today, and if we don't, we might be able to email them out to you individually or as a group. But the next question I had is from Bart. It looks like, are one-time credit cards a good practice to use when conducting business online?
Yeah, I would say they are. And I'm assuming this is like a prepaid or something like that. It's inconvenient, but anything that's inconvenient is probably more secure. Just like if you had a throwaway cell phone, you know, the prepaid cell phones. If you don't put anything on your cell phone. And I can tell you along those lines, when I do my classes, 70–75% of the people in my classes do not have a password on their mobile devices. And there's so much information on there. One of the things I do is provide sort of technical legal support to law firms. And most firms don't realize the amount of information available on mobile devices and social media that they can use as evidence or against the adversary in the case. So yeah, anything that creates an inconvenience actually will make you more secure. So yeah, and I hadn't heard that, but yeah, that's a very good technique.
Okay, should IT security professionals possess a security clearance as a requirement of being in the profession? And if so, should the employer pay for this since the cost of it is very high?
Not well. I mean, I had a clearance in the military. I'm not sure if that's the type of clearance you're talking about. Certainly, a background check. I would agree with that, because you don't want to put the fox in charge of the hen house. It all goes back to the risk management program. So as you're evaluating the risks and the risk to information, if making sure that the internal IT person or the vendor that you hire is very trustworthy, then absolutely. And I think I have some time. Real quick on the vendors. If you've locked down your networks and all your information and everything's going great, but you hire a vendor and you know nothing about their security, whether it's a cloud vendor or an IT company or what have you, your lawyer, your CPA, you're basically handing all your information to that person and you know nothing about them. And this is an extreme, but I equate the cloud to this. You have a gold brick that's very precious to you, and you don't want to have to carry it around with you everywhere you go, but you want it available to you whenever you need it. So you give it to somebody and say, here, can you hold my gold brick for me and make it available to me whenever I need it? And the guy says, sure, I'll do that. But in their agreement it says they have no responsibility. So if that brick is lost, stolen, seized by the FBI or in a court action, or they get breached and it's stolen, they have zero responsibility. You're responsible for that gold brick, not them. So that's basically what the cloud is. Now there's different levels of that. You can pay to make them responsible, but any of the generic cloud services, you read their terms of service or their SLA, they have no responsibility. So if you lose all your stuff, they're going to say, oh, well, sorry about that. Or if they go out of business or bankrupt, or the FBI seizes a server with all your stuff on it, it's like, oh, sorry about that. So.
Have courts held business owners and executives responsible for breaches?
Not yet that I'm aware of, but executives were held responsible for Enron. What was the Valdez, Exxon Valdez. So, and then I mentioned the FTC just got the go-ahead from a court to sue a company over lack of reasonable security. So as these breaches continue and are in the news more and more, there is going to be more lawsuits and more people being held responsible. That's why I'm saying it is the executives or the owner's fiduciary responsibility, and they better do something about it now. The, hey, talk to my IT guy or the IT vendor I hired isn't going to cut it anymore.
If I can't prevent a breach, should I just use the least expensive security possible?
This goes back to the risk assessment. Like for me, I'm for the most part, except for I joined Azorian Cybersecurity. I'm working with them, doing some consulting with them right now. But for the most part, it's me and my laptop. So I don't pay for antivirus. I go find free antivirus. But if I was a company of 100 employees or more, then I'm going to have to pay for antivirus. So antivirus is, I've heard people say 0% effective, but I wouldn't go that far. I'd say 6 to 20% effective. So you need to budget for that 6 to 20% effectiveness. I would not put all your money into antivirus. Again, with the firewall, do you need the best firewall out there? Depends on your circumstances. So you need to gauge the level of money that you put into your security based on the risks and how important you feel it is to you and how effective that particular piece of security is.
What can I, as a project manager, do to educate myself on cybersecurity? I am currently studying for my CCNA, but what else can I do to gain knowledge on a policy level?
Just start reading. There's a bazillion articles online. Again, if you want up-to-date things or what's going on with the hacker world, like I mentioned, Krebs on security, the Verizon data breach reports, and it all depends on what level of knowledge you're looking for. If you just want an overview of what's going on, then that'll work. If you want to get more in depth, what actually put it all together for me was when I studied for and took my CISSP. I had a lot of knowledge I didn't realize I had, and this just connected all the dots, and it was kind of the oh wow moment of, oh, I know that and I understand that and I've dealt with that, so it just kind of pulled it all together for me.
Well, thanks so much, David. I think we're just about out of time, and
Okay.
Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so just look out for a link in your email the next couple of days. So thanks so much, David, for a great webinar, and thank you all for attending, and hope everybody has a great Tuesday.
Thank you.